Sarah Mitchell sat in her car outside the old Victorian house. She stared at the peeling blue paint on the wooden walls. The house looked sad and empty. Her grandmother had died 3 months ago, and now this house belonged to Sarah. She was 32 years old and had never owned a house before. This felt strange and heavy. The summer sun was hot that Saturday morning. Sarah grabbed her bag full of cleaning supplies from the back seat. She had brought wood polish, dust cloths, a vacuum cleaner, and rubber gloves. The lawyer had told her something odd during their last meeting. He said her grandmother left special instructions about one thing in the house. An old piano needed to be cleaned first before Sarah could move or sell anything else. Sarah found this request very strange. She had visited this house many times as a child. She remembered running through the rooms and playing in the small garden behind the house. But she could not remember her grandmother ever playing the piano. In fact, she could not remember anyone touching it at all. The piano just sat there in the corner of the parlor like a piece of furniture that nobody used. She walked up the wooden steps to the front door. The key felt cold in her hand. When she turned it, the lock made a loud click. The door opened with a long creak. The smell of old wood and dust filled her nose. Sarah stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Everything looked exactly as she remembered. The flowered wallpaper was faded and yellow. Family photos hung on the walls in old frames. Her grandmother's reading chair sat by the window with a knitted blanket folded on top. Sarah felt tears come to her eyes. She missed her grandmother so much. She walked through the hallway into the parlor. There it was. The piano stood against the far wall between 2 tall windows. It was an upright piano made of dark wood. The wood had intricate carvings of flowers and leaves all around the edges. Even covered in dust, Sarah could see it had once been beautiful. She set down her cleaning bag and walked closer to the piano. A white sheet covered the top and keyboard. When Sarah pulled the sheet away, dust flew into the air and made her cough. She waved her hand in front of her face and waited for the dust to settle. The piano was even more beautiful than she had thought. The dark wood was probably mahogany or walnut. She could see her reflection in some spots where the dust was lighter. The keys were made of real ivory and ebony. Some of the white keys had turned yellow with age. The black keys looked dull and lifeless. Sarah opened her bag and took out her supplies. She did not understand why her grandmother wanted this piano cleaned so badly. Her grandmother's name was Eleanor. She had been a quiet woman who loved reading books and tending her garden. She had been married to Sarah's grandfather, Thomas, for 50 years until he died 10 years ago. Eleanor had never mentioned the piano in all the conversations they had shared. Sarah began dusting the outside of the piano. She used a soft cloth and moved it gently over the carved wood. Years of dust came off on the cloth. She had to get a new cloth 3 times because they kept getting too dirty. As she cleaned, the beauty of the piano started to show. The wood had a deep, rich color. The carvings were detailed and delicate. Someone had made this piano with great care and love. After an hour of dusting, Sarah decided to clean the keys. She lifted the fallboard that covered the keyboard. The keys looked dirty and old. Some were stuck together. Sarah got a bowl of warm water and a gentle soap. She dipped a cloth in the water and squeezed it almost dry. Then she began wiping each key carefully. The work was slow. There were 88 keys on the piano. Each one needed to be cleaned on the top and sides. Sarah's back started to hurt from bending over. She pulled a chair from the dining room and sat down in front of the piano. This was better. Now she could take her time. As she cleaned, Sarah started to wonder about the piano's history. How long had it been in her grandmother's house? Where did it come from? Her grandmother had lived in this house since 1955. That was the year she married Thomas Mitchell. Sarah did some quick math in her head. That meant the piano had been here for at least 64 years, maybe longer. Sarah finished cleaning the keys and sat back to look at her work. They looked much better now. The white keys were brighter and the black keys had a nice shine. She pressed one of the keys gently. A soft note rang out in the quiet room. The sound was dusty and weak, but the piano still worked. Now came the hard part. Sarah needed to clean inside the piano. She knew that piano insides were complicated with many strings and small parts. She did not want to break anything. She opened the top lid carefully. It was heavy and stiff. The hinges creaked loudly. Sarah propped the lid open with the wooden stick that was attached to it. Inside the piano, she could see hundreds of strings running from one end to the other. There were felt hammers that hit the strings when someone pressed the keys. Everything was covered in thick dust and what looked like old cobwebs. Sarah sighed. This was going to take a while. She got her vacuum cleaner and used the small brush attachment. Very carefully, she began vacuuming the dust from inside the piano. She had to be gentle so she would not damage the strings or hammers. The vacuum made a loud noise in the quiet house. Sarah worked slowly, moving the brush across every surface she could reach. After vacuuming, she used a dry cloth to wipe down the frame and the soundboard. That was the large wooden piece inside the piano where all the strings were attached. As she cleaned, Sarah noticed something interesting. There were words carved into the wood of the frame. She leaned closer to read them. The words said, "To my dearest Eleanor, may our love song never end, J.W. 1953. Sarah sat back in shock. Someone had carved a love message into the piano. The message was to her grandmother Eleanor. But who was J.W.? Her grandfather's name was Thomas Mitchell. His initials were T.M., not J.W. Sarah felt her heart beat faster. This was a mystery. She looked at the carving again. The words were definitely there, carved deeply into the wood. They were not just scratched on the surface. Someone had taken time and care to make these words permanent. Sarah felt like she had discovered a secret. But what did it mean? She continued cleaning, but now her mind was full of questions. Who was J.W.? Why did he give her grandmother this piano? What happened to him? Did her grandfather know about this message? Sarah realized she knew very little about her grandmother's life before marriage. Eleanor never talked much about her youth. She always focused on the present or talked about Sarah's life instead. Sarah cleaned the music rest next. This was the wooden ledge where people put their sheet music when they played. She wiped it carefully with her damp cloth. As she cleaned underneath it, her finger hit something hard. It felt like a small button or latch. She looked closer and saw a tiny brass latch hidden in the shadow under the music rest. Her heart started pounding. She pressed the latch carefully. Nothing happened. She pressed it again, harder this time. Suddenly there was a soft click. A small panel in the wood popped open slightly. Sarah had found a secret compartment. Her hands were shaking now. She gently pulled the small panel open all the way. Inside the hidden space, she could see something. There was a bundle of papers tied with a ribbon. The ribbon had once been blue, but now it was faded and gray. The papers looked very old. They were yellow and the edges were brown. Sarah reached in and carefully lifted out the bundle. It was heavier than she expected. She held it in both hands like it was made of glass. Her mind was racing. What were these papers? Why were they hidden in the piano? She stood up and walked to the sofa near the window. The light was better there. She sat down and placed the bundle on her lap. Her fingers worked slowly to untie the ribbon. The fabric was delicate and old. She was afraid it might break. After a minute of careful work, the ribbon came loose. Sarah unfolded the papers. They were letters. Old letters written in ink on thick paper. The handwriting was beautiful and flowing. It was the kind of handwriting people do not use anymore. She looked at the first letter. At the top it said, "My dearest Eleanor." At the bottom it was signed, "Forever yours, James Whitmore. James Whitmore, J.W." The same initials from the carving inside the piano. Sarah's hands trembled as she held the letter. This was something big. This was something her grandmother had kept secret for many years. Sarah looked around the empty house. She felt like she was not alone. She felt like her grandmother was there watching her make this discovery. She wanted to read the letters right away, but something stopped her. This felt sacred and private. These were her grandmother's secrets. Did Sarah have the right to read them? She sat there for a long moment thinking. Then she remembered the lawyer's instructions. Her grandmother had told him that the piano must be cleaned before anything else. Eleanor knew Sarah would find these letters. She wanted Sarah to find them. This was not an accident. This was planned. Sarah took a deep breath. She unfolded the first letter and began to read. The date at the top said June 15, 1952. That was 73 years ago. Her grandmother would have been 20 years old then. Sarah began reading the words that James Whitmore had written to young Eleanor all those years ago. The letter talked about a sunny day they had spent together by a lake. James wrote about how beautiful Eleanor looked with the sun in her hair. He wrote about their dreams of the future. He wanted to be a famous piano player. She wanted to write books. They planned to move to a big city together. Maybe New York or Boston. They would have a small apartment and be poor but happy. James wrote that he loved her more than music. more than life itself. Sarah felt tears on her cheeks. She wiped them away, but they kept coming. This letter was so full of love and hope. It was so beautiful and sad at the same time, because Sarah knew something that young James and Eleanor did not know when this letter was written. Sarah knew that Eleanor did not move to a big city. She did not marry James Whitmore. She married Thomas Mitchell and lived in this small town in Maine her whole life. What happened? Why did her grandmother's life turn out so differently? Who was James Whitmore and what happened to him? Sarah looked at the pile of letters on her lap. There were at least 20 or 30 of them, maybe more. These letters held the answers to her questions. She looked at her watch. It was already past noon. She had been cleaning the piano for over 3 hours. Her back hurt and she was hungry. But she did not want to stop now. She wanted to keep reading. She wanted to know her grandmother's secret story. Sarah stood up and walked to the kitchen. She found some crackers in the cupboard that were probably too old to eat, but she did not care. She filled a glass with water from the tap. She brought the food and water back to the sofa. Then she settled in and picked up the second letter. As she read, the afternoon sun moved slowly across the room. The house was quiet except for the sound of Sarah turning pages. Outside, birds sang in the trees. A car drove by occasionally, but Sarah noticed none of this. She was lost in the past, reading about a love story that had been hidden in an old piano for decades. Each letter revealed more of the story. James was a piano teacher in town. He gave lessons to children and adults. He had studied music at a famous school called Juilliard in New York City. But he had come back to Maine to care for his sick mother. That was where he met Eleanor. She had come to him for piano lessons. They fell in love quickly. But there was a problem. Eleanor's parents were rich and important in town. James was poor. He lived in a small apartment above a shop. He made barely enough money from teaching piano. Eleanor's parents did not approve. They told Eleanor she could not see James anymore. But young people in love do not listen to such rules. The letters told of secret meetings. They met at the lake outside of town. They met in the public library. James would play piano at the church, and Eleanor would sit in the back pew pretending to pray, but really listening to his music. They wrote letters to each other almost every day and found clever ways to deliver them without Eleanor's parents knowing. Sarah read faster and faster. She was completely absorbed in the story. She felt like she was there with them, feeling their joy and fear. She understood now why her grandmother kept these letters hidden. This was a treasure. This was proof that Eleanor had once been young and wild and brave enough to love someone her parents hated. But Sarah still did not know how the story ended. She looked at the remaining letters. They were dated through 1954. Then there were no more. What happened in 1954? Why did the letters stop? And how did Eleanor end up marrying Thomas Mitchell in 1955? Sarah picked up another letter, ready to continue reading. But as she did, she noticed something. At the very bottom of the pile, there was one more piece of paper. It was different from the others. It was newer, whiter. The paper was not yellow or brown at all. This letter had been written recently. Sarah pulled it out carefully. When she saw the handwriting, her breath caught in her throat. This letter was written in her grandmother's handwriting. The same handwriting Sarah had seen on birthday cards and Christmas notes her whole life. She looked at the date. The letter was written just 3 weeks before her grandmother died. At the top of the page it said, "To whoever finds these letters." Sarah's hands shook as she held the paper. Her grandmother had known someone would find this secret compartment. Maybe she had even guessed it would be Sarah. This letter was meant for her. Sarah stood up and walked to the window. The late afternoon sun was turning everything gold. She looked out at the street where she used to play as a child. Everything looked the same but felt completely different now. She held her grandmother's final letter in her hands, afraid to read it but unable to wait. She took a deep breath and looked down at the page. It was time to learn the truth. It was time to understand the secret her grandmother had kept hidden in an old piano for more than 60 years. Sarah began to read, and as she did, the whole story finally became clear. Sarah sat by the window holding her grandmother's letter. The paper felt warm in her hands from the afternoon sun. She could see her grandmother's careful handwriting covering both sides of the page. For a moment, she just stared at it. Reading this letter would change everything. Once she knew the truth, she could never go back to thinking of her grandmother the way she used to. She finally began reading. The letter started with gentle words. Eleanor wrote that she hoped whoever found these letters would not judge her too harshly. She said she had lived a long life and made many choices. Some choices were easy, some were the hardest things she ever did. The letters from James Whitmore were proof of a love that had shaped her whole life, even though most people never knew it existed. Sarah kept reading. Her grandmother explained that she needed to tell the whole story. She wanted someone to understand. She wrote that keeping this secret for so many years had been both painful and comforting. The letters were her treasure, hidden away where no one could take them from her. But the letter Sarah held was just an introduction. Eleanor wrote that she had hidden something else in the house. There was a journal. In this journal, Eleanor had written the complete story of what happened between her and James. She wrote it years ago when the memories were still fresh and clear. The journal would explain everything. Sarah looked up from the letter. Her heart was racing again. There was more? A whole journal? Where could it be? She read the next part of the letter carefully. Eleanor gave instructions. The journal was hidden in the attic inside an old hat box. The hat box was blue with white flowers. It sat on the shelf near the small round window. Sarah folded the letter carefully and put it back with the others from James. She tied the ribbon around the bundle again and placed it gently on the sofa. Then she walked to the hallway where the attic stairs were. She pulled down the folding stairs and climbed up into the hot, dusty space above. The attic was full of old things. Boxes were stacked everywhere. Old furniture with sheets over it made strange shapes in the dim light. One small round window let in some sunshine. Sarah could see dust floating in the air like tiny stars. She sneezed twice and wiped her nose. She looked at the shelves near the window. There were many boxes and old suitcases. She started searching through them. The third box she opened was made of cardboard and very old. Inside were old hats from many years ago. But no journal. The fourth box was also full of hats. Sarah was getting frustrated, then she saw it. Behind two larger boxes was a hat box that matched her grandmother's description. It was blue with white flowers painted on the sides. The paint was faded and the box was dusty, but it was definitely the right one. Sarah reached for it and pulled it toward her. It was not heavy. She sat down on the floor of the attic, not caring about the dust. She opened the hatbox lid slowly. Inside, wrapped in soft cloth, was a notebook. The cover was made of leather and looked very old. The edges were worn and the leather was cracked in places. Sarah unwrapped it carefully and opened to the first page. In her grandmother's handwriting, the first page said, "The true story of Eleanor and James, written in 1965. Below that it said, "For my eyes only until I am gone. Then someone should know the truth." Sarah felt goosebumps on her arms despite the heat in the attic. Her grandmother had written this 30 years after the events happened. 30 years after James, but still 40 years ago from today. Eleanor had been married to Thomas for 10 years when she wrote this. What made her write it all down then? Sarah knew she could not read the journal in the hot attic. She climbed back down the stairs with the journal held carefully against her chest. She went back to the parlor and sat on the sofa. The bundle of James's letters was still there. She placed the journal next to them. Now she had the whole story in front of her. The letters James wrote. The letter her grandmother wrote to whoever would find them. And now this journal with the complete truth. She opened the journal and began to read. Her grandmother's voice came through in the words, and Sarah felt like Eleanor was sitting right there next to her, telling the story out loud. Eleanor wrote that she first met James Whitmore in the spring of 1952. She was 19 years old and had just finished 1 year at a women's college. Her parents wanted her to study education so she could become a teacher. It was a proper job for a young woman from a good family. But Eleanor did not want to be a teacher. She wanted to be a writer. She filled notebooks with stories and poems that no one ever read. That spring, her mother decided Eleanor needed to learn piano. It was something cultured young ladies should know. Eleanor's mother asked around town and found out about James Whitmore. He was new to town, people said. He had studied at Juilliard, which was very impressive. He gave piano lessons in his small apartment above Miller's hardware store. Eleanor's mother made the appointment. Eleanor did not care much about learning piano, but she did not argue. She went to her first lesson on a Tuesday afternoon in April. She climbed the narrow stairs to James's apartment and knocked on the door. When James opened the door, Eleanor's life changed. She wrote in her journal that it was like being struck by lightning. James was 24 years old. He had dark hair and blue eyes. He was thin and tall. He wore simple clothes but carried himself like a prince. When he smiled at her, Eleanor forgot how to breathe. James was kind and patient during that first lesson. He showed Eleanor how to sit at the piano and how to position her hands. His voice was soft and gentle. When he played the piano to demonstrate something, the music was the most beautiful thing Eleanor had ever heard. She sat there and watched his fingers move over the keys like magic. Eleanor wrote that she knew after just one lesson that she was falling in love. She had never felt anything like it before. She went home that day in a daze. She could not eat dinner. She could not focus on anything. All she could think about was James and the way he played piano and the way he had smiled at her. The lessons continued every Tuesday and Thursday. Eleanor practiced at home on her family's piano, but she was not really trying to learn. She just wanted an excuse to keep going to James's apartment. After a few weeks, James asked if she would like to stay after one lesson and talk for a while. Eleanor said yes immediately. They talked for hours that day. James told her about growing up poor in a small town in Vermont. His mother was a seamstress and his father had died when James was young. But James had a gift for music. A local church organist noticed his talent and gave him free lessons. James practiced every day for hours. Music was his escape from poverty and sadness. He won a scholarship to Juilliard when he was 18. In New York, he studied with famous teachers. He learned to play piano better than almost anyone. He dreamed of becoming a concert pianist and playing in the great halls of Europe. But then his mother got sick. She had cancer. James came back to Maine to take care of her. She died 6 months later. James stayed in town because he had nowhere else to go and no money to leave. He gave piano lessons to survive. Eleanor told him about her life too. She told him things she had never told anyone. She told him about wanting to be a writer, about feeling trapped by her parents' expectations, about feeling like she was supposed to be someone she was not. James listened to her like her words were music. He understood her in a way no one else ever had. After that day, their lessons changed. They would practice piano for half an hour, and then they would talk for 2 hours. They shared their dreams and fears. James played music for her that made her cry. Eleanor showed him poems she had written, and he said they were beautiful. It took 6 weeks before James kissed her. Eleanor wrote in her journal that she had been waiting for it since the day they met. After one lesson in late May, as she was leaving, James took her hand. He looked at her and asked if he could kiss her. Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. The kiss was soft and perfect. Eleanor felt like she was floating. From that moment, they were inseparable. They had to be careful, though. Eleanor's parents would never approve. James was poor and had no family connections. Eleanor's father, Richard Bennett, was a banker and one of the richest men in town. Her mother, Catherine, cared very much about social status and reputation. They had plans for Eleanor to marry someone from a good family, someone with money and a future, so James and Eleanor kept their love secret. They met at the lake on Sundays when Eleanor told her parents she was going to church. They wrote letters to each other every day. James would leave his letters under a loose brick by the library steps. Eleanor would pick them up when she went there to study. She would leave her letters for him in the same place. In his letters, James wrote about their future. He was starting to save money. He had written to his old teachers at Juilliard. There was a possibility of a job playing piano for a small orchestra in New York City. The pay was not much, but it was enough to live on. If he got the job, James wanted Eleanor to come with him. They could get married and start their life together in the city. Eleanor wrote back that yes, she would go anywhere with him. She would leave her parents and their money and their plans for her. She would rather be poor with James than rich without him. She meant every word. The summer of 1952 was the happiest time of Eleanor's life. She wrote in her journal about long walks with James, picnics by the water, secret meetings in his apartment where he would play piano just for her. He was teaching her his favorite pieces. She was getting better at playing, and it made them both happy. But by fall, Eleanor's parents were becoming suspicious. They noticed she was different. She smiled more. She seemed distracted. Her mother started asking questions about where Eleanor went and who she saw. Eleanor had to be more careful. In October, James got news from New York. The orchestra wanted to hire him. The job would start in January 1953. James was so excited he could barely contain it. He told Eleanor they needed to make a plan. They should tell her parents the truth. If her parents said no, they would leave anyway. Eleanor would be 20 years old in November. She was old enough to make her own choices. Eleanor agreed, but she was scared. She knew her parents would be furious. She knew there would be consequences. But she loved James too much to care. They decided to tell her parents in December, just before James had to leave for New York. But things did not go according to plan. In early December, Eleanor's mother found one of James's letters. Eleanor had hidden them in her bedroom in a box under her bed. Her mother was looking for something and found the box. She read the letters, all of them. Eleanor wrote in her journal about the day her mother confronted her. Her mother was ice cold with rage. She said Eleanor was throwing her life away. She said James was using Eleanor to escape his poverty. She said no daughter of hers would marry a poor piano player and live in some tiny apartment in New York. Eleanor tried to stand up for herself and James. She said she loved him. She said they were getting married whether her parents approved or not. Her mother laughed at her. Then her mother said something that changed everything. She said if Eleanor left with James, her parents would disown her completely. Eleanor would never get a penny from them. More than that, her father would use his connections to make sure James never worked as a musician again. He would call his friends in New York. He would spread rumors about James. He would destroy James's reputation and his career before it even started. Eleanor was devastated. Her mother was not just threatening Eleanor. She was threatening to destroy James's dreams, the orchestra job, his chance to escape poverty, his whole future. Eleanor's father had enough power and money to actually do it. Eleanor knew this was not an empty threat. That night, Eleanor met James at their usual spot by the lake. It was snowing lightly. James was excited about their plans, but Eleanor had to tell him what her mother said. She watched his face change as she explained. The excitement died in his eyes. He became quiet. They sat together in the cold for a long time. James held Eleanor's hand. Finally, he said he would not let her sacrifice her family for him. He said he would give up the job in New York. They could wait until her parents changed their minds. Maybe in a few years, when they saw how serious James was, they would accept him. But Eleanor knew better. Her parents would never change their minds. They would never see James as good enough. If Eleanor and James waited, they would wait forever. Her parents would eventually force her to marry someone else. Someone they approved of. Someone boring and rich who Eleanor did not love. They talked for hours that night in the snow. Both of them cried. Neither of them knew what to do. They loved each other, but the world seemed designed to keep them apart. Finally, as the sun was starting to come up, they went their separate ways. They agreed to think about everything and meet again in a few days. Sarah stopped reading. Her eyes hurt and her back was stiff from sitting. She looked up and realized it was getting dark outside. She had been reading for hours. The story her grandmother told was so sad. Young Eleanor and James loved each other so much, but Eleanor's parents were trying to destroy that love. Sarah stood up and stretched. She walked to the kitchen and found some tea bags in the cupboard. She made herself hot tea and brought it back to the parlor. She turned on a lamp and settled back on the sofa. She needed to know what happened next. She picked up the journal again and continued reading. Sarah sipped her tea and kept reading her grandmother's journal. The next part of the story was even harder to read. Eleanor wrote about the days after that snowy night with James. She felt trapped and helpless. She could not eat or sleep. She spent her time in her room crying and trying to think of a solution. James came to the house 3 days later. He asked to speak with Eleanor's father. Eleanor's mother tried to send him away, but Richard Bennett agreed to meet with him. Eleanor stood at the top of the stairs and listened to their conversation in her father's study. James was respectful and honest. He told Richard that he loved Eleanor and wanted to marry her. He said he had a good job waiting for him in New York. He promised to work hard and take care of Eleanor. He said he knew he was not rich, but he could give Eleanor a happy life. Richard Bennett listened to everything James said. Then he spoke. His voice was cold and hard. He told James that Eleanor was promised to someone else, a young man named Thomas Mitchell who worked at Richard's bank. Thomas came from a good family. He had prospects and money. The marriage would be good for business and good for Eleanor. Eleanor wrote that when she heard her father say this, she felt like dying. Her parents had been planning her marriage without telling her. They had chosen Thomas Mitchell, a man Eleanor barely knew. He was nice enough, but Eleanor felt nothing for him. He was quiet and dull. He talked about numbers and investments. Eleanor could not imagine spending her life with him. James argued with Richard. He said Eleanor should choose her own husband. He said this was 1952, not the Dark Ages. Women had rights now. Eleanor was not property to be traded for business deals. Richard's face got red with anger. He told James to leave his house immediately. If James ever contacted Eleanor again, Richard would destroy him. He would make sure James never played piano professionally anywhere in the country. James left the house. Eleanor ran down the stairs to follow him, but her mother grabbed her arm. Her mother locked Eleanor in her bedroom. Eleanor pounded on the door and screamed, but no one let her out. She finally collapsed on her bed and cried until she had no more tears left. For the next 2 weeks, Eleanor was a prisoner in her own home. Her parents watched her constantly. They took away her coat and shoes so she could not sneak out. They read all her mail. They answered the phone before Eleanor could get to it. A few times, James came to the house, but Eleanor's parents sent him away. Once, Eleanor saw him from her window. She tried to open the window to call to him, but it was locked. Eleanor tried to fight. She refused to eat. She would not speak to her parents. She stayed in her room and stared at the wall. Her mother brought Thomas Mitchell to the house several times to visit. He would sit in the parlor and talk to Eleanor's parents while Eleanor sat silent and miserable. Thomas seemed confused by the whole situation. He was not a bad man, Eleanor wrote. He was just the wrong man. On Christmas Eve, 1952, something happened that changed everything. There was a knock at the door late at night. Eleanor was in her room as always. She heard her father answer the door. Then she heard voices. Something in the tone made her get out of bed. She pressed her ear against her bedroom door to listen. Someone was telling her father that there had been an accident. A car accident on the icy road near the lake. The person said James Whitmore had been driving too fast. His car slid on the ice and hit a tree. James was in the hospital. It was bad, Eleanor screamed. She threw herself against the locked door. She begged her parents to let her out. She needed to go to the hospital. She needed to see James. Her mother came upstairs and told her through the door that there was nothing Eleanor could do. The doctors were with James. Eleanor should stay in her room and pray. Eleanor did pray. She prayed all night. She made promises to God. She said if James lived, she would be good. She would do whatever her parents wanted. She would marry Thomas Mitchell. She would give up her dreams. She would live the life her parents planned for her. Just please, please let James live. But God did not answer her prayers the way she wanted. The next morning, Christmas morning, Eleanor's father came to her room. His face was sad. He told Eleanor that James had died during the night. His injuries were too severe. He was gone. Eleanor wrote that something inside her died that day too. She stopped crying. She stopped fighting. She became quiet and empty. She stayed in her room for 3 days, not speaking, not eating, not doing anything. Her parents started to worry that Eleanor would hurt herself. They finally called a doctor. The doctor gave Eleanor medicine to help her sleep. He told her parents that Eleanor was suffering from grief and shock. She needed time to heal. The doctor said Eleanor should not be forced to make any big decisions right away. She needed rest and peace. Eleanor's parents listened to the doctor. They stopped talking about Thomas Mitchell and wedding plans. They let Eleanor be alone. They gave her time. Eleanor spent the next month like a ghost in her own house. She moved from room to room but did not really live. She read books but could not remember what they said. She looked out windows but did not see anything. In February, Eleanor asked her father about James's funeral. Richard told her that James had already been buried. His body had been sent back to Vermont, where his family was from. There had been a small service, but Eleanor's parents had not told her about it. Eleanor realized she never got to say goodbye. She asked if James had left anything behind. Her father said James had very few possessions. His landlord packed up his apartment. Most of his things were thrown away. But there was one item. James had a piano. The landlord did not know what to do with it. He was going to sell it for whatever money he could get. Eleanor asked her father to buy the piano. It was the only thing she asked for. Richard Bennett was relieved to see Eleanor showing interest in something, anything. He bought the piano from the landlord. He had it delivered to their house. The piano was placed in the parlor. That was where it had stayed ever since. For weeks, Eleanor could not look at the piano. She could not touch it. Just seeing it made her want to cry. But slowly, month by month, being near the piano helped her feel close to James. It was the piano he had played. His hands had touched these keys. His music had come from this instrument. The piano became her connection to him. Eleanor discovered the secret compartment by accident in April. She was dusting the piano, something she did often because taking care of it made her feel like she was taking care of James's memory. Her hand hit the small latch under the music rest. The hidden panel opened. Inside were the letters. All the letters Eleanor had written to James over the months they were together. He had kept every single one. Eleanor sat on the floor and read her own letters. She read about her love for James, her dreams of their future, her promises to always be with him. Reading those words broke her heart all over again, but it also gave her a strange kind of peace. The letters were proof that their love had been real. It was not just her imagination or a dream. James had loved her. She had loved him. That was true, even if everything else fell apart. Eleanor put her letters in the hiding place along with all of James's letters to her. She tied them with a blue ribbon, James's favorite color. She closed the compartment. She decided this would be her secret, her private treasure. No one else needed to know about it. In June 1953, Eleanor's mother started talking about Thomas Mitchell again. She said enough time had passed. Eleanor needed to move forward with her life. Thomas was still interested in marrying Eleanor. He was patient and kind. He was willing to wait for Eleanor to be ready. Eleanor remembered her prayer the night of James's accident. She had promised God that if James lived, she would do whatever her parents wanted. James had not lived, but Eleanor felt like she should keep her promise anyway. Maybe it was the right thing to do. Maybe God wanted her to marry Thomas for some reason she did not understand. Or maybe Eleanor was just too tired to fight anymore. She was 21 years old and felt like an old woman. She had no energy left, no hope left. Thomas Mitchell was nice. He would take care of her. Maybe that was enough. Maybe love like she had with James only came once in a lifetime. Maybe she should be grateful she had it at all, even for such a short time. In September 1953, Eleanor agreed to marry Thomas. They had a small engagement party. Eleanor wore a blue dress the same color as the ribbon around the letters. Thomas gave her a diamond ring. Everyone said they made a handsome couple. No one seemed to notice that Eleanor never smiled. The wedding was planned for June 1955. That gave them almost 2 years to prepare. Eleanor went through the motions. She picked out flowers and a dress. She made guest lists. She did everything a bride was supposed to do. But inside she felt nothing. Thomas tried to make Eleanor happy. He took her to nice restaurants. He bought her gifts. He talked to her about his plans for their future. He wanted to have children. He wanted to build a house. He wanted to give Eleanor a comfortable life. Eleanor listened and nodded but did not really care about any of it. Sometimes Thomas would ask Eleanor if she was happy. Eleanor would say yes, but they both knew it was a lie. Thomas was not stupid. He knew Eleanor did not love him the way a wife should love a husband. But he loved Eleanor enough for both of them, he told himself. Maybe eventually she would learn to love him back. In her journal, Eleanor wrote that she did feel something for Thomas. Not love, but affection, gratitude. He was a good man who deserved better than a wife who was in love with a ghost. Eleanor tried to be kind to him. She tried to be the wife he wanted. But part of her would always belong to James. The wedding happened as planned. It was a beautiful day in June. Eleanor wore a white dress and carried white roses. Thomas looked proud and happy. Eleanor's parents were thrilled. They had gotten exactly what they wanted. Their daughter was marrying a respectable man from a good family. During the ceremony, as Eleanor said her vows, she thought about James. She wondered what he would think of her marrying someone else. Would he understand? Would he forgive her? She hoped he would. She hoped wherever he was, he knew she had never stopped loving him. After the wedding, Eleanor and Thomas moved into the house where Sarah was now sitting. It had been Thomas's grandmother's house. The old woman had died and left it to Thomas. Eleanor brought the piano with her. Thomas did not understand why Eleanor wanted this old piano, but he did not argue. He helped move it into the parlor where it fit perfectly. Eleanor's married life began. She tried to make the best of it. She cooked meals and kept the house clean. She joined clubs and made friends. She smiled at parties and pretended to be happy. And slowly, very slowly, it became less of a pretense. She started to actually feel okay sometimes. Thomas was patient with Eleanor. He never pressured her to be something she was not. He accepted her quiet moods and her distant moments. After a few years, they fell into a comfortable routine. They were not passionate lovers, but they were good companions. They understood each other. Eleanor never told Thomas about James. She never told him why she never played the piano, even though it sat in their parlor. Thomas never asked. Maybe he suspected there was a story there, but he respected Eleanor's privacy. That was one of the things Eleanor appreciated about him. Children did not come. Eleanor and Thomas tried for many years, but it never happened. This was a sadness they shared. They would have been good parents. But it was not meant to be. Instead, they poured their love into their nieces and nephews. Eventually, into their grandchildren like Sarah. The years passed. The 1950s turned into the 1960s. The world changed around them, but Eleanor and Thomas's life stayed steady. Thomas worked at the bank and did well. They traveled a little. They had friends. They had a good life. Not exciting, but good. In 1965, 10 years into her marriage, Eleanor decided to write everything down. She got a journal and spent weeks writing the story of her and James. She wrote about their love and their plans and his death. She wrote about her marriage to Thomas and how she had learned to be content. She wrote it all down so she would not forget any details, so that someday, maybe someone would understand. She hid the journal in the attic in a hat box. She left her final letter tucked in with James's letters in the piano. Then she tried to let the past rest. She focused on the present, on Thomas, on building a life that was worth living even if it was not the life she had once dreamed of. Sarah stopped reading again. Her tea had gone cold. Outside, it was completely dark. She looked at the piano sitting against the wall. Her grandmother had lived with that piano for 70 years. Every day, Eleanor must have looked at it and thought of James. Every day, she must have remembered. But Eleanor had also loved Thomas. Maybe not the same way, but real nonetheless. Sarah understood that now. Her grandmother's heart had been big enough to hold two loves. The passionate, tragic love of her youth, and the steady, comfortable love of her marriage. Sarah thought about her grandfather, Thomas. He had died when Sarah was 22 years old. He had been a kind man with a quiet sense of humor. He had taught Sarah to play chess. He had given her birthday money and told her to spend it on something fun. Sarah had loved him. Did he know about James? Did he know that Eleanor kept letters hidden in the piano? Sarah would never know the answer. But maybe it did not matter. Thomas and Eleanor had 50 good years together. They had built a life. That was worth something. That was worth a lot. Sarah closed the journal and set it carefully on the sofa next to the bundle of letters. She felt overwhelmed by everything she had learned. Her grandmother's life had been so much more complicated than Sarah ever imagined. Eleanor had not been just a quiet old lady who baked cookies and grew tomatoes in her garden. She had been a young woman who loved deeply and lost everything. She had been strong enough to survive that loss and build a new life. Sarah stood up and walked to the piano. She ran her fingers along the smooth wood. This piano had witnessed so much. It had been James's most precious possession. He had bought it with money he saved from teaching lessons. He had played it every day. His music had filled his small apartment. Then James died and the piano came to Eleanor. For 70 years it had sat in this room. Eleanor must have touched it thousands of times. She had dusted it and polished it. She had kept it beautiful. But she had never played it. Playing it would have hurt too much. Sarah pressed one of the keys gently. The note rang out in the quiet house. The sound was soft but clear. Even after all these years with no maintenance, the piano still had a beautiful voice. Sarah pressed another key, then another. She did not know how to play. The sounds she made were not music, but somehow making any sound at all felt important. She sat down on the piano bench. From this angle, she could see where James had carved his message inside the frame. To my dearest Eleanor, may our love song never end. J.W. 1953. The love song had ended when James died. Or had it? Maybe in a way it never ended at all. Eleanor had kept the letters. She had kept the piano. She had carried James in her heart for her entire life. Maybe that was love's song continuing in a different form. Sarah thought about her own life. She was 32 years old and had never been married. She had dated people, but nothing serious, nothing that lasted. She always told herself she was too busy with her career. She worked as a teacher at the local elementary school. She had friends and hobbies. Her life was fine. But was it enough? Reading her grandmother's story made Sarah wonder. Was she avoiding love because she was scared? Was she playing it safe because taking risks seemed too dangerous? Eleanor had loved with everything she had. It destroyed her when she lost James, but at least she had really lived. At least she had felt something powerful and true. Sarah realized she wanted that. She wanted to feel the way Eleanor felt when she wrote about James. She wanted to love someone so much that the whole world seemed brighter. She had been settling for fine and okay and comfortable, just like Eleanor had settled with Thomas, but without even the excuse of a broken heart. Sarah was just coasting. She looked around the house. There was so much here, so many memories and stories. It seemed wrong to sell it all to strangers. But Sarah did not know if she wanted to keep it. The house needed repairs. It needed updating. It would be a lot of work. And did she want to live here, surrounded by her grandmother's ghosts? Sarah did not have answers. She decided she would think about it tomorrow. Right now she was exhausted. Reading the journal had taken hours and drained her emotionally. She needed to go home, eat something real, and sleep. She could come back tomorrow and figure out what to do next. She gathered the letters and the journal carefully. She put them in her bag to take home with her. She wanted to keep them safe. These were precious now. These were proof of a love story that deserved to be remembered. Before she left, Sarah looked at the piano one more time. An idea was forming in her mind. She was not sure if it was a good idea or a crazy idea, but it felt right somehow. She would sleep on it and decide tomorrow. Sarah locked the house and drove home. That night she barely slept. She kept thinking about Eleanor and James, about the letters, about the piano, about love and loss and second chances. Her mind would not quiet down. The next morning, Sarah got up early and went back to the house. She had made a decision during the night. She was going to find out everything she could about James Whitmore. She wanted to know more about the man her grandmother had loved so much. She wanted to understand him better. She started with the internet. She searched for James Whitmore in Maine and found some records. There was a death certificate from December 25, 1952. Cause of death was listed as car accident. There was also a brief obituary from a local newspaper. The obituary was short. It said James Whitmore, age 24, had died in a tragic accident. He was a talented pianist who had studied at Juilliard. He taught piano lessons and was known in the community for his kindness and musical ability. He was survived by no immediate family. Services were held in Vermont, where he was buried next to his mother. That was all, an entire life reduced to a few sentences in a newspaper. It seemed so unfair. James had been more than this. He had dreams and talents and love to give. He deserved to be remembered better. Sarah kept searching. She found information about Juilliard School of Music. She called their alumni office and asked if they had any records of James Whitmore. The woman on the phone was helpful. She said she would look into it and call Sarah back. 3 days later, the woman called. She had found some information. James Whitmore had attended Juilliard from 1946 to 1950. He had been an excellent student. One of his professors had written that James had exceptional talent and could have been one of the great pianists of his generation. There was a recording in the archive of James playing in a student recital. Would Sarah like a copy? Sarah said yes immediately. She gave them her email address. An hour later, the recording arrived. Sarah's hands were shaking as she downloaded it and pressed play. Piano music filled her room. The piece was something classical that Sarah did not recognize. But the playing was incredible. The notes flowed like water, sometimes soft and gentle, sometimes powerful and dramatic. Sarah closed her eyes and listened. This was James. This was the man Eleanor had loved. His fingers on the keys, his soul in the music. Sarah cried as she listened. The music was so beautiful it hurt. To think that James had died so young, with so much talent still inside him. All the music he could have created. All the joy he could have brought to the world. All lost in a car accident on an icy road. When the recording ended, Sarah sat in silence for a long time. Then she knew what she had to do. She had to honor James's memory properly. She had to make sure his story was not forgotten, and she had to honor her grandmother's love too. Sarah spent the next week researching. She called the local historical society and talked to an old woman named Dorothy Henderson. Dorothy was 87 years old and had lived in town her whole life. She remembered Eleanor and James. "Oh yes," Dorothy said on the phone. "I remember that whole thing. It was quite the scandal at the time. Eleanor Bennett was from the richest family in town. James Whitmore was just a poor piano teacher. Eleanor's parents were furious when they found out the two of them were involved." Dorothy told Sarah more details. She said Eleanor and James tried to keep their relationship secret, but people noticed. Small towns are like that. Everyone knows everyone else's business. Dorothy had been friends with Eleanor back then. They had gone to school together. Eleanor changed after James died, Dorothy said. She was never the same. She married Thomas Mitchell, and he was a good man. But anyone could see her heart wasn't fully in it. At least not at first. I think she grew to love Thomas over the years in her own way. But James was her first love. Her true love. You never really get over that. Sarah asked Dorothy if she knew why James had been driving that night. Why was he out on an icy road late on Christmas Eve? Dorothy sighed. "I heard he was leaving town," Dorothy said, "heading to New York for that orchestra job. He knew Eleanor's parents would never let them be together, so he was going to go make something of himself. Maybe he thought if he became successful, Eleanor's parents would change their minds. Or maybe he just couldn't stand to stay in a town where he couldn't be with the woman he loved." Sarah felt her heart break a little more. James had been leaving. He was trying to do the right thing. He was going to build a future, but he never made it. The ice and the darkness took him instead. Sarah thanked Dorothy for her time. After they hung up, Sarah sat and thought about everything. A plan was forming in her mind. A way to honor both Eleanor and James. A way to make something beautiful from all this sadness. First, Sarah called a piano restoration company. She asked them to come look at the piano in her grandmother's house. A man named Robert came out 2 days later. He was older, maybe 60, with gentle hands and kind eyes. He examined the piano carefully. "This is a beautiful instrument," he said. "Old, but very well made. The wood is solid. The keys are real ivory. With proper restoration, this piano could sing again. It would cost some money, but it would be worth it. This piano deserves to be played." Sarah asked Robert how much the restoration would cost. He gave her a number that made her wince. It was expensive, but Sarah had some savings. And she had the inheritance money from her grandmother's estate. She could afford it. She told Robert to go ahead with the work. Over the next 6 weeks, Robert and his team restored the piano. They cleaned every part. They replaced broken strings and worn hammers. They regulated all the keys so they played evenly. They polished the wood until it glowed. They tuned every note until the sound was perfect. When they were finished, Robert called Sarah to come see it. She drove to the house nervous and excited. When she walked into the parlor, she gasped. The piano looked brand new. It was stunning. The wood gleamed. The keys were bright white and black. It was the most beautiful piece of furniture Sarah had ever seen. Robert sat down and played a few notes. The sound was incredible, rich and warm and full. The piano had a voice again after so many years of silence. Sarah felt tears in her eyes. "This piano has a story," Robert said, standing up from the bench. "I can feel it. Whoever played this loved it very much. The care that went into making this instrument and the care that went into preserving it all these years. This piano has been loved." Sarah told Robert a little bit about Eleanor and James. Not the whole story, but enough. Robert listened and nodded. "I'm glad you're bringing this piano back to life," he said. "Music should be heard. Instruments like this are meant to be played, not kept silent." After Robert left, Sarah sat at the piano. She pressed a few keys. The notes were clear and beautiful. She wished she knew how to play. She wished she could make real music on this piano that had meant so much to James and Eleanor. Then Sarah had another idea. She called the local high school and asked to speak to the music teacher. His name was Mr. Peterson. Sarah explained that she had a restored piano that she wanted to donate. She wanted it to go to a student who could not afford their own piano, a student who loved music and had talent but needed help. Mr. Peterson was thrilled. He said he had several students who would benefit from having a piano at home. He would select the most deserving one. Sarah said she had one condition. She wanted a small plaque attached to the piano. The plaque would tell James and Eleanor's story. Not everything, but the important parts. That James was a talented pianist who died young. that Eleanor preserved his piano for 70 years, that their love story deserved to be remembered. Mr. Peterson agreed. He said it was a beautiful idea. He would arrange everything. Sarah felt good about this decision. The piano would make music again. A young person would get to follow their dreams, and James and Eleanor's story would live on, but Sarah realized she wanted to do more. The piano was just the beginning. She wanted to create something bigger, something that would help other young musicians the way James never got to be helped, something that would honor the love that Eleanor had carried in her heart for so many years. Sarah decided to create a scholarship, the Eleanor and James Music Scholarship. It would go to a talented music student from their town who wanted to study at a place like Juilliard. The scholarship would cover tuition and living expenses. It would give someone the chance that James never fully got to use. Sarah used a large portion of her inheritance to set up the scholarship fund. She worked with a lawyer to create the foundation properly. She wrote the story of Eleanor and James in the scholarship application materials. She wanted people to know why this scholarship existed. She wanted James's name to be remembered. The scholarship foundation took 3 months to set up properly. Sarah worked with lawyers and accountants to make sure everything was done right. She wanted the scholarship to continue for many years, helping student after student. The fund was large enough that it would provide money for at least one student every year, maybe more. While the legal work was being done, Sarah made another decision. She decided to keep her grandmother's house, not to sell it but to live in it herself. The idea had been growing in her mind for weeks. The house was full of memories, but they were good memories now that Sarah understood the full story. This house had sheltered Eleanor through her grief. It had been the home where Eleanor built a life with Thomas. It deserved to stay in the family. Sarah gave notice at her apartment. She started packing her things. On weekends, she went to the old house and cleaned room by room. She painted walls and fixed broken tiles. She updated the kitchen and bathroom but kept the character of the house. She wanted it to feel like a blend of old and new, respect for the past but ready for the future. The piano was gone, given to its new home with a deserving student. But Sarah bought a small upright piano for herself. She started taking lessons. She was not very good at first. Her fingers felt clumsy on the keys. The notes she played were hesitant and wrong. But her teacher was patient and Sarah practiced every day. Learning piano connected Sarah to James in a strange way. Every time she sat at the piano, she thought about him. She imagined his fingers flying over the keys. She thought about the hours he must have spent practicing to become so good. Music was hard. It required dedication and passion. James had both. Sarah also felt connected to Eleanor in a new way. She understood now why Eleanor never played the piano. It would have been too painful. Every note would have reminded her of James. Every song would have brought back memories of what she lost. So Eleanor kept the piano but kept it silent. It was there, a constant reminder, but quiet like her grief. As Sarah settled into the house, she made one room into a small library. She put Eleanor's journal and James's letters in a special display case. She added the photos she found in the attic. Pictures of young Eleanor with dark hair and bright eyes. A few pictures of James that Eleanor had hidden away. Sarah also framed the newspaper obituary and the information from Juilliard. She created a shrine to their love story. Sarah did not do this to be morbid or to live in the past. She did it to remember, to honor, to make sure that what Eleanor and James shared was not forgotten. Love like theirs deserved to be witnessed and celebrated, even if it ended in tragedy. In March, 6 months after Sarah first cleaned the piano and found the letters, the first scholarship was awarded. A 17-year-old girl named Maria Chen won. Maria was a brilliant violinist who dreamed of studying at a music conservatory. Her parents worked hard but did not have money for expensive schools. The scholarship would make her dreams possible. Sarah attended the award ceremony at the high school. She watched Maria accept the scholarship with tears of joy. Maria's parents hugged her and cried. The music teacher, Mr. Peterson, gave a speech about James Whitmore and Eleanor Mitchell. He told their love story to the whole auditorium. People listened with tears in their eyes. After the ceremony, Maria came to talk to Sarah. "Thank you so much," Maria said. "This scholarship changes everything for me. I promise I will work hard and make the most of this opportunity. I want to honor James and Eleanor's memory by becoming the best musician I can be." Sarah hugged Maria. "They would be so proud," Sarah said. Go follow your dreams. That is the best way to honor them. That night, Sarah went home and sat in her grandmother's house. She felt Eleanor's presence there. Not in a scary way, but in a comforting way. She felt like Eleanor was telling her that she had done good. That this was exactly what Eleanor had hoped for when she left the letters to be found. Sarah thought about her grandmother's final letter, the one addressed to whoever found the letters. Eleanor had written that she hoped people would not judge her. She hoped they would understand that hearts are complicated, that you can love more than one person in different ways, that life does not always work out the way you plan, but you can still build something good. Sarah understood all of this now. She understood that Eleanor had been brave. First, brave enough to love James despite her parents' disapproval, then brave enough to keep living after he died, brave enough to marry Thomas and build a life even though her heart was broken. Brave enough to find happiness again, or at least contentment. And Thomas. Sarah thought about her grandfather differently now too. He must have known on some level that Eleanor did not love him the way she had loved someone else. But he married her anyway. He stayed with her for 50 years. He was patient and kind. He gave Eleanor space to grieve quietly while still being present in her life. That took its own kind of courage. Sarah realized that both Eleanor and Thomas were heroes in their own way. Their love story was not passionate or dramatic like Eleanor and James's story, but it was real and it mattered. They built a life together. They supported each other. They grew old together. That was an accomplishment. That was love too, just a different kind. Spring turned into summer. Sarah continued her piano lessons. She was getting better slowly. She could play simple songs now, nothing complicated but real music. Sometimes she played in the evening, sitting at her piano in the house that had been her grandmother's. She wondered if Eleanor's spirit could hear. She hoped so. One day in July, Sarah got a call from Maria Chen. Maria wanted to invite Sarah to her senior recital. She would be playing several difficult pieces. Maria said Sarah had been such an important part of her journey, and she wanted Sarah to be there. Sarah went to the recital. She sat in the audience at the high school auditorium. When Maria walked onto the stage with her violin, Sarah felt proud. Maria played beautifully. The music was complex and emotional. Sarah did not understand all the technical aspects, but she could feel the passion. This was what James must have sounded like. This was the magic that music could create. After the recital, Sarah congratulated Maria. "You were wonderful," Sarah said. "Truly incredible," Maria smiled. "I played one of the pieces for James," she said. "I figured he would appreciate hearing good music again wherever he is. I like to think that somehow he knows the scholarship exists, that his story is being remembered." Sarah felt tears in her eyes again. She had cried so much over the past months. But these were good tears. Tears of connection and meaning and love that continued even after death. As summer went on, Sarah found herself changing. She was more open with people. She took more risks. She said yes to invitations she might have refused before. She went on dates with people she met. Nothing serious yet, but she was trying. She was putting herself out there. She was being brave like Eleanor had been brave. One August evening, Sarah went to a community concert in the park. A local jazz band was playing. Sarah brought a blanket and sat on the grass listening to the music. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. The music was happy and alive. A man about Sarah's age sat down on the blanket next to hers. "Great music, right?" he said with a friendly smile. Sarah smiled back. "Yeah, it really is." They started talking. His name was David. He was a teacher too at the middle school. He taught science. He had a kind face and an easy laugh. They talked through the whole concert. When it ended, David asked if Sarah would like to get coffee sometime. Sarah said yes. She went on her first date with David 3 days later. They talked for hours. Sarah told him about her grandmother's house and the piano and the love story she had discovered. David listened with genuine interest. He asked good questions. He seemed to really understand why the story mattered so much to Sarah. "That's beautiful," David said, "that your grandmother kept that love alive for so many years, and that you found a way to honor it. The scholarship is an amazing idea." Sarah felt comfortable with David. She felt like she could be herself. They started dating regularly. Coffee dates turned into dinner dates. Dinners turned into long walks and movie nights. Sarah was careful not to rush anything. She wanted to be smart, but she also let herself feel. She let herself be open to the possibility of love. By October, Sarah and David were officially together. Sarah brought him to the house and showed him the library room with Eleanor and James's story. David stood there reading everything, looking at the photos. When he finished, he turned to Sarah with emotion in his eyes. "This is special," he said. "The way you have honored them. The way you are keeping their story alive. You are a special person, Sarah." Sarah felt her heart swell. Maybe this was the beginning of her own love story. Maybe Eleanor's story had taught Sarah how to be brave enough to love fully. Maybe that was the gift her grandmother had left her, along with the house and the letters. That November, the second scholarship was awarded. This time it went to a young man named Jason who played classical guitar. The scholarship fund was working exactly as Sarah had hoped. Another talented musician got a chance to pursue their dreams. Another person would know the story of Eleanor and James. Sarah attended the ceremony with David by her side. She watched Jason accept the scholarship with the same joy and gratitude that Maria had shown. Sarah felt proud. She felt like she had taken something tragic and turned it into something beautiful. She had transformed grief into hope. As winter approached, Sarah thought about the year that had passed. 12 months ago, she had been living alone in a small apartment. She had been going through the motions of life without really living. She had been safe and comfortable and bored. Then she found the letters in the piano. Everything changed. She learned about love and loss and courage. She learned about her grandmother's secret heart. She learned that life was complicated and messy and beautiful. She learned that taking risks was scary but necessary. Now Sarah was living in her grandmother's house. She had created a scholarship that would help musicians for years to come. She had a relationship with a man who might turn into something serious. She was taking piano lessons and challenging herself. She was really living, not just existing. On Christmas Eve, exactly 2 years after James had died on that same date, Sarah had a small dinner party at the house. She invited David, some friends from school, Maria Chen and her family, and Dorothy Henderson from the Historical Society. She wanted to bring together people who had been part of this journey. After dinner, Sarah stood up to make a toast. Everyone raised their glasses. "I want to thank everyone for being here," Sarah said. "This house, this table has a lot of history. My grandmother Eleanor lived here for 70 years. She survived loss and built a life. She kept a secret love alive in her heart while also honoring the man she married." Sarah paused, collecting her thoughts. "This year I found letters hidden in a piano. Those letters told me a story I never knew. A story about young love and dreams and tragedy. A story about a man named James Whitmore who died too young. And a story about my grandmother who carried him with her always." Everyone was listening quietly. Sarah continued. "I learned that love does not die just because a person dies. I learned that hearts are big enough to hold multiple truths. I learned that the way we honor the people we have lost is by living fully, by loving bravely, by making the world better." Sarah raised her glass higher. "So here is my toast, to Eleanor and James, to a love story that ended too soon but somehow never ended at all, to music and memory and the courage to keep going even when your heart is broken, and to all of us here tonight who are part of keeping their story alive." "To Eleanor and James," everyone said together, raising their glasses. After the toast, Maria got her violin from her car. She played a song for everyone. It was a beautiful, sad melody that seemed perfect for the evening. Sarah listened and thought about James playing his piano, about Eleanor listening to him play, falling in love with the music and the man creating it. When Maria finished, there was not a dry eye in the room. The music had touched everyone. It connected them to something bigger than themselves, to the past and to love and to the mysterious way that stories echo through time. That night, after everyone left, Sarah sat alone in the quiet house. David had offered to stay, but Sarah wanted some time by herself. She went to the library room and looked at the pictures of Eleanor and James. They were so young in the photos, so full of hope. "Thank you," Sarah said out loud to her grandmother. "Thank you for leaving the letters. Thank you for trusting me with your story. Thank you for teaching me about love and courage." Sarah felt like she received an answer, though not in words, just a feeling of peace that filled the room, a sense that Eleanor was satisfied, that this was exactly what she had wanted. Her story remembered. James remembered. Love honored. Sarah turned off the lights and went upstairs to bed. Tomorrow she would have Christmas with David's family. Then the day after, she had a piano lesson. Life continued, full and rich and complicated. As Sarah fell asleep, she thought about the piano that started everything. It was in a student's home now, making music daily. The piano that James bought and Eleanor preserved was singing again. And somewhere, somehow, Sarah liked to believe that James and Eleanor were together again. That death had finally reunited them after so many years apart. Love stories do not always end the way we want them to. Sometimes they are interrupted by tragedy. Sometimes people cannot be together in life, but love itself never dies. It transforms. It continues in the people left behind, in the memories kept sacred, in the music that keeps playing. Sarah had learned this lesson from an old piano and a bundle of letters. She had learned it from her grandmother's courage and her grandfather's patience. She had learned it from James's talent and passion. And now Sarah would live that lesson. She would love bravely. She would honor the past while building the future. She would make sure that the song of Eleanor and James never truly ended. The love story that was hidden in a piano for 70 years had come to light. And in coming to light, it had changed Sarah's life. It had created scholarships and opportunities. It had brought people together. It had reminded everyone that love matters, that the connections we make, the people we cherish, the dreams we hold close, all of it matters. Sarah closed her eyes and smiled. Her grandmother had given her one final gift, not money or property, but wisdom. The wisdom that comes from living a full life, from loving deeply, from surviving loss, from building something meaningful from the pieces that remain, and Sarah would take that gift and use it well. She would love fully. She would live bravely. She would honor the memory of Eleanor and James by making sure their love story continued to inspire others for generations to come. The piano had been cleaned. The secret had been revealed, and in the revealing, something beautiful had been born, a legacy of love that would never truly end.